Whoa, hold your horses there. I know that people have varying opinions in getting someone to dive deep into the Persona rabbit hole and get them addicted and soon they will not be able to live without it, but I do think that Persona 3 Reload is the best way for someone who's never played or even heard of Persona before to get into the series. My friend who was an avid Persona fan way before me, he was already a Persona fan maybe during middle school, he told me about Persona and how good it is like a couple of years ago. I never really cared or paid attention to what he said about it. I just knew him as someone who is a Persona nerd. After all those years, what he said suddenly appeared in the back of my mind like a father returning home from getting milk at the store. I started playing Persona 3 Reload as my first Persona ever. I got the Xbox PC Game Pass and it was on it. So I downloaded it. I downloaded it because I was listening to Trash Taste and Joey said a lot of good things about it. I played the game and I never looked back. I really loved the series a lot. Here's my experience on why Persona 3 Reload is the best way to start the Persona series. Before we get into my experience, we need to go over on why Persona 3 Reload is the best way to get into the series. I started Persona 3 Reload because, well, it was on the Xbox Game Pass and I don't think I can buy the game when it was still on full price, but I started it because it's supposedly the first official installment in the series. I mean, Persona 1 and 2 do exist, but if you're seriously someone trying to get into Persona, especially someone in this day and age, Persona 1 and 2 is way too outdated and just not really good compared to the modern installment of the series. You can argue about the story and the characters, but I don't think Persona 3 to 5 is inferior in terms of story and characters compared to Persona 1 and 2. Actually, it's way better because since Persona 3, they introduced the social link system. Anyways, the first reason why Persona 3 Reload is the best way to get into Persona is because it's the latest game and it's up to date. Persona isn't a series where you have to start with the first game. Spoiler to anyone who hasn't played Persona, every game has different stories and characters, like all of them. It does not continue from the last game or whatever, it always introduces the game into a new setting, new story, in a new point of time. Yes, sometimes there are recurring characters in the next installment of the game, but it's mostly just a cameo. So you don't have to absolutely start from the first Persona, you can start from any Persona actually. Now, Persona 3 Reload can kind of give you the whole basic premise of Persona in a really good way. Since it's still Persona 3, the combat system is not too hard and not too complicated for anyone to understand. Persona 3 Reload has the same combat system as its original version, but a lot more modernized. Persona 3 Reload has the feature where you can change to another team member when you down the enemy, and it has Thurgy, which are ultimate attacks basically. It's actually a lot easier in Persona 3 Reload, which also is a good reason to start from here. The game's movement, graphics, songs, UI is a lot more modernized and better. Some people might argue that some of the songs from the original Persona 3 were better than the ones in the Persona 3 Reload, but you can't deny that nearly every aspect of the game was modernized. Keep in mind that when I say modernized, I don't mean the game has gone woke and was made for a modern audience, no. I mean that the game was modernized so that it's a much better game from a technical standpoint. The original Persona 3, the movement's all janky, there are no switching between teammates when the enemy was downed, there are no Thurgy, there was probably not a lot of animated cutscenes 2D and 3D, there are no dorm interactions, it does not have a lot of the features that Persona 3 Reload had, obviously. If you start with Persona 3 Reload as your first Persona game, you're starting the series in the earliest and the best way possible. Let's just go over on how it is with me when I started the game. Obviously, I started the game with just very minimal knowledge about the series. I actually really briefly played Persona 3 on the PS2 when I was still a little wee lad, because my sister got the game and I tried it out. I had no idea what was happening on screen, I did not know how to play, and I played maybe like 30 minutes of the game only. Anyways, if you're going into this blind, don't worry, you're not going to have headaches on understanding and remembering mechanics. I went into the game expecting it to be just a game where I probably won't finish it because I was really not in the greatest headspace back then. A lot of games that I wanted to try, and I did try, I never finished it, or I have never even made it past like the 5-hour mark. So I did go into this game not expecting much, and I just thought it would be like I play once for 3 hours and be done forever. Well, safe to say now that the reason why I love Persona and made a lot of Persona videos on this channel is because I ended up playing Persona 3 Reload until the end. Firstly, this game was definitely not like anything that I've played before. I did not play a lot of JRPGs growing up because I was really not a big fan of turn-based games. The only exception for turn-based games was Fate Grand Order and Pokemon. Those are the only two games that I was okay playing because I really like the Fate series and I grew up with Pokemon. I don't like turn-based JRPGs because it's way too slow, not a lot of action that required my motor functions, and it was way too confusing for me back then. I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. What do you expect? I played CSGO, League of Legends, FIFA, and Fortnite back then, so naturally my IQ has gone downhill a bit and brain rot was taking over. Going into Persona while being someone who mostly played the most brain cell killing games throughout primary school to high school is like going from jerking off to being pegged. It's a lot of risk, but it's worth it in the end. So the fact that I, someone who wasn't a big fan of turn-based JRPGs, was able to finish Persona 3 Reload in less than 2 weeks, playing more than 8 hours a day, showed that the game was made easier for most people to get into. During my time playing Persona 3 Reload, my life was just sleep, shower, eat, Persona 3 Reload, eat, sleep. My activity cycle was literally just that. The game was really good. I don't know what the differences are between the original and the Reload version. Some people say that they altered the story quite a bit, but I think the story in Persona 3 Reload is still really good regardless. If you're someone who barely plays single-player story games for whatever reason, maybe Persona 3 Reload is still a really big leap for you because it does require a skill in understanding dialogues, characters, and stories. Despite this game being an action turn-based JRPG, the biggest value is the story. Even though I mostly played brain-rotted multiplayer games back then, I did play a handful of single-player games. Games like Fallout 4, Red Dead Redemption 2, Uncharted 4, Grand Theft Auto 5, and Skyrim were the single-player story experiences that I remembered playing. Even Fate Grand Order is a single-player game and it's a very story-heavy game. A lot of dialogues, a lot of paying attention, and requires a lot of understanding. So maybe it's not a big leap forward for me to start playing Persona, but I never really wanted or even imagined myself playing a JRPG game. This has to be one of the best stories that I've ever experienced. Playing a story like this, it's something that I cannot repeat again, but I really wish that I can experience it again for the first time. I don't want to spoil the game too much, especially those who want to start the series, but just be prepared to go through a beautiful and emotional journey of a story. Okay, so to the people who will say Persona 4 Golden is the best way to start Persona, or go for Persona 5 Royale if you want to start the series, you're all within your rights to have your own opinions. Although why I suggest Persona 3 Reload compared to Persona 4 Golden or Persona 5 Royale is because, again, the latest Persona game that came out, and it is the earliest in the series to experience it in the best way possible. If you played Persona 4 Golden as your starting Persona game, obviously it's a lot harder to get into. The game is quite literally more than a decade old. In fact, it's just a re-release of a game that was released in 2008, which added a bunch of features that Atlas should have added in the first place. The movement is all still janky, it's clearly lacking in a lot of features compared to Persona 3 Reload, there is no remastered version, and the game is clearly way harder. I mean, if you want to start playing from Persona 4 then to the modern games, it'll be a cakewalk for you. The story and characters are still really great, but the whole game is pretty outdated in today's standards, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't play Persona 4 Golden because it's not worth it and it's outdated, no. But I'm pretty sure it's hard for a lot of people to get into Persona through Persona 4 Golden because it will most likely not meet their standards of gameplay. As much as the stories and characters are really good in Persona 4, still remember that this is a game. You are playing a game. You're not watching or reading, you are playing a game. So of course, gameplay is important. Well, if you're someone who values story and characters more than anything, then go ahead, you can start Persona 4 first. But for the people who still want to enjoy playing a game, the best way is to start Persona 3 Reload. So what about Persona 5 Royale? It's the best game from a technicality standpoint, and it's the 5th game in the franchise, so it should be a pretty good game to start first, right? Well, yes. Technically. I was really torn into two between Persona 5 Royale and Persona 3 Reload as the best way to get into the Persona series. Persona 5 Royale, despite it being released before Persona 3 Reload had a lot of new and cool features in the game which ultimately can defeat Persona 3 Reload in terms of gameplay. But I think it's still better to start with Persona 3 Reload because it's the earliest game. Persona 3 Reload, you have really good and modern gameplay. On top of that, you have the best story in this series. Persona 5 Royale, you have really good gameplay, but the story isn't on the same level as Persona 3. The story is still really good and really fun, but it's not on the level of Persona 3. My journey was literally Persona 3 Reload, Persona 4 Anime, it's weird I know, then Persona 5 Royale. This is probably the most natural progression of starting the Persona series as someone like me. You know, a gamer who played multiplayer games mostly, except that you can change Persona 4 Anime with the actual game. Also, I think it's better to hold off the really good gameplay and save the best for last, because you'll be a lot more excited when you finally get to play the most fun game in the series. Persona 3 Reload is just a really good and well-balanced game, offering the most in most areas while having little flaws. Persona 4 Golden is clearly lacking in the gameplay from a technicality standpoint, but the cast of characters are probably the best in the series. Persona 5 Royale is superior in the gameplay, but the story is clearly not as good as the other two in the series. That's from my own deduction and from my experience, so feel free to follow the same path as I went. At the end of the day, you are free to do whatever you want. Even though I'm saying that the best way to start Persona is from Persona 3 Reload, I'm just here merely giving my opinion based on my own judgment and experience. I'm giving you reasons and information so that you can make your own judgment on which game you want to start first. You can start from Persona 4 Golden, Persona 5 Royale, Persona 3 Reload, it does not matter. I think what matters is that you enjoy the game fully and become dependent on it until you can't live and breathe without it. Although I think we all have to agree that to never start the Persona series from Persona 1 and 2. You're just making yourself suffer if you actually do that. Remember, most Persona fans don't even play the first two games in the series, let alone actually play any of the Persona games. Persona fans don't play the games, so maybe you actually don't need to play or know anything to get into Persona. That is all. I'll see ya.